Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're spotlighting a lesser-known but gripping real-life story, the case of George Edward Wright. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Meet George Wright. George Edward Wright was born on March 29, 1943, in the small town of Halifax, Virginia. Halifax in the 1940s was quiet farmland and modest homes, the kind of place where everyone knew your family name. Very little is documented about Wright's early years. We don't have many records of his childhood friends, his school days, or even the exact nature of his home life. But we do know that by his late teens and early 20s, George was far from the slow rhythms of rural Virginia. He eventually found himself in New Jersey, and it was there in the early 1960s that his life took a turn from which there would be no easy return. The murder case. 1962. It was November 23, 1962, the night after Thanksgiving. George Wright, just 19 years old at the time, was in the company of three other men, Walter McGee, James Washington, and another accomplice. They were not out for holiday leftovers. They were armed and ready for robbery. Their first stop was a motel in Englishtown, New Jersey. Wearing stockings pulled down over their faces, they barged in, brandishing weapons. The haul was modest, cash and valuables, but their night wasn't over. From there, they drove to Wall Township and targeted an Esso gas station. Wright carried a sawed-off .22 caliber rifle. McGee had a .32 caliber pistol. Inside, behind the counter, stood Walter Patterson, the proud and steadfast owner of the station. At 42 years old, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had already faced life's greatest trials and triumphed. A decorated World War II veteran, Patterson had earned the prestigious Bronze Star for acts of heroism under fire, a testament to both his courage and his unwavering dedication to his fellow soldiers. To the townsfolk, he was more than just a businessman. He was a living example of honor, perseverance, and the unshakable American spirit. In the tense moments that followed, McGee fired. The bullet struck Patterson in the abdomen. He just collapsed, totally defeated, as the robbers made off with $70. Patterson fought hard for 2 long days in a hospital, but sadly, he just couldn't survive his injury. The police sprang into action, and just like that, Wright and McGee were arrested in just 2 days. His community was totally outraged. A decorated war hero lost his life in a senseless robbery that shook everyone to the core. The case moved fast through the courts. On December 13, 1962, George Wright was indicted for murder. Wright, worried about facing the death penalty if found guilty, decided to take a plea deal. On February 15, 1963, he pleaded no contest to the murder charge. The court sentenced him to 15 to 30 years in state prison. Life inside Bayside State Prison. Wright was sent to Bayside State Prison in Leesburg, New Jersey, a medium security facility. Unlike the towering, concrete-walled prisons that come to mind when we think of maximum security, Bayside was surrounded by farmland. Fields and woods stretched out beyond its perimeter. The security was firm, but not impenetrable. For 8 years, Wright served his time, but he was a keen observer. He noticed the guard routines, the open spaces, the cornfields that grew thick and high in the summer. He started to really think about leaving, not because of parole, but on his own terms. It felt like the right time to take control of his life. The Escape, 1970. On August 19, 1970, Wright and 3 other inmates finally put their wild plan into action. It was brilliantly simple. Slip away during a work detail, vanish into the cornfields, and keep moving. That afternoon, they walked away from their assigned duties and disappeared into the tall stalks of corn. Hidden from view, they waited until dark. Then, they made their way to the prison parking area, where the warden's own car that was parked in the parking lot. They broke in, hot-wired it, and drove 30 miles to Atlantic City, still wearing their prison uniforms turned inside out to look like civilian clothes. They were gone without a trace. By the time prison officials realized they were missing, Wright and his partners were already deep into their new lives on the run. a new life on the run. Wright made his way to Detroit, Michigan, where he connected with members of the Black Liberation Army, a militant group that saw itself as fighting a war against systemic racism and oppression. For Wright, these connections offered both a cause and protection, but the authorities were still after him. And so, in the summer of 1972, Wright and several members of the Black Liberation Army planned an operation so audacious it would make international headlines. Delta Flight 841. It was July 31st, 1972. Delta Airlines Flight 841, a DC-8 jet, was preparing to depart from Detroit bound for Miami. 86 passengers boarded, among them a man dressed as a priest, clerical collar in place, Bible in hand. That priest was George Wright. Hidden inside his hollowed-out Bible was a small handgun. Traveling with him were his accomplices, Joyce Brown, Ralph Goodwin, and 2 others, all armed. Once the plane was in the air, Wright and his group sprang into action. Weapons came out. The passengers were told the flight was being hijacked. The pilots were ordered to change course to Miami. The hijackers demanded $1 million in ransom, a massive sum at the time. They also made a strange request. The person delivering the cash had to be wearing only swim trunks. No shirt, no shoes, no hat. A tactic to make sure the courier wasn't hiding a weapon. When the plane landed in Miami, the FBI complied. An agent, bare-chested and wearing just swim trunks, walked across the tarmac carrying a suitcase stuffed with $100 bills. The cash was handed over. The hijackers released the passengers unharmed, but they kept the flight crew. From Miami, they made a quick stop in Boston to refuel, and then took off across the Atlantic, headed straight for Algiers, Algeria, and beyond. In the early 1970s, Algeria had a reputation for offering asylum to political radicals, including members of the Black Panthers and Black Liberation Army. The moment the DC-8 touched down in Algiers, the Algerian authorities swooped in, grabbing the plane and the ransom cash, sending both back to the U.S., but they allowed Wright and his companions to stay in the country. For a time, Wright lived in Algeria freely. But in 1976, some of his hijacking partners were arrested in Paris. Wright managed to slip away again. This time, he headed south, to the small West African nation of Guinea-Bissau. There, he assumed the name José Luis Jorge dos Santos, married a Portuguese woman, had children, and became part of the community. He worked as a fisherman, did odd jobs, and even helped with humanitarian projects. For decades, George Wright lived quietly in West Africa and later in Portugal. The FBI never stopped searching, but it felt like Wright just disappeared completely. The capture, 2011. In 2002, the U.S. Marshal Service and the FBI reopened the case in earnest. They used age progression imaging to guess what Wright might look like now. They traced possible connections to family and old associates. The breakthrough came in Portugal in 2011, when Wright applied for a Portuguese identity card. His fingerprints were matched against the fugitive database. On September 26, 2011, Portuguese police arrested him at his home near Lisbon. He was 68 years old. The U.S. government immediately requested extradition so Wright could serve the remainder of his murder sentence. But Wright fought the request in Portuguese courts. His lawyers argued that because he had Portuguese citizenship, and because the murder and hijacking had happened decades earlier, extraditing him would violate Portuguese law. In 2012, the Portuguese Supreme Court ruled in Wright's favor. He would not be sent back to the United States. Life today. George Wright is soaking up the sun and enjoying life as a free man in beautiful Portugal today. He has given occasional interviews, expressing regret for the pain caused, but also defending the political motivations behind his actions in the 1970s. He is in his 80s now, having spent more than 4 decades on the run before securing his permanent freedom. From Halifax, Virginia, to a gas station in New Jersey, from a prison cornfield to the cockpit of a hijacked jet, From the deserts of Algeria to the coastal villages of Portugal, George Wright's story is one of the most remarkable sagas of crime, escape, and survival in modern history. And while the debate continues over whether he should have served out his sentence, one fact remains. George Wright is one of the very few fugitives who got away and stayed away. Thanks for sticking around until the end. I really appreciate every single view. If you like the content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Catch you next time.